So I was thinking about co-creation and trying to reflect on what its role is in the wider scope. So we're trying to increase how much co-creation we get involved in. We presumably don't want to do only co-creation, right? We all join a team and talk to each other and never spend any time pacing around our own bedrooms and studies and groves and doing sort of private digestion. It's got to be some kind of mixed thing. So there is this quite attractive ideal of knowledge creation we have in mind with co-creation. And I'm trying to reflect on what it is in particular that it brings. One candidate that comes to mind is there's a mix of qualifications that you can get, right? I work in a university, I'm surrounded by experts by training. We need to balance this, we need to include experts by experience in this. And that's certainly part of the story. But very often, experts by experience undergo training as well, become experts by training as well. Lots of people who are experts by training are motivated to do so because they have the first-hand experience as well. And a lot of really important work that we've looked at, Frantz Fanon, bell hooks, have this sort of status in society that informs their theories about how race works and how racism works. And that's sort of quite commonplace. So that's part of the story of why co-creation is attractive. But it can't be the whole story. Another part is that there's a social dynamic to co-creation. And I think there's something important in here. But we have to remember, even the cloistered scholar kind of sitting, reading a book, pacing around the cloisters, is having a mediated social interaction with someone else, even if that person's long dead, right? Whatever Granny Weatherwax might think about reading books being too akin to necromancy, like there is this perspective sharing across time that's really useful. So it's not, neither of these ingredients on their own can be what we're looking for. So I think what we're really looking for, what makes co-creation stand out is the kind of in-the-roomness of the exchange. So something that happens in the room that is much harder to achieve in other circumstances. And I wanted to reflect on what that was. And I looked around for resources that might help me from philosophy, as philosophers want to do, look at your bookcase and see who jumps out at you. One of the sort of ideas that came quite useful in the end came from somewhere I didn't quite expect, which is from aesthetics, the theory of art and the philosophy of beauty. Nick Riggle is an aesthetician who has a theory of social interactions as almost like performative artworks. And I found what he had to say really quite useful, and it kind of made me reflect on knowledge creation in formalized contexts and in co-creation. And I think it's helped sort of draw out, for me at least, what we're aiming for at the end of all this. So usually academics are experts by training. We wind up with a set of skills. We have a set of procedures we use to create our knowledge. And it winds up when we all get together, we have a social script we fall into that kind of reflects this training we have. A social script is just any set of norms or conventions that mediate a social interaction for you, right? You go to the shop, now they go to the cafe to buy a coffee. Can I have a coffee, please? Yes, that'll be $2.50. Here you go, thanks. You don't need to put any thought into it. Your lines are written for you beforehand, as if you were simply enacting a script. And academics have these scripts as well. Doctors have these scripts. We all have scripts based on our roles. We have these scripts in more informal cases as well. But when we're doing formal knowledge creation, and we're in this role as someone who does formalized knowledge creation, usually our script's going to start reflecting the conceptual vocabulary. Here's this range of concepts we use in our knowledge creation. They'll get baked into our script. We'll have maybe an order of inquiry. We'll go through the problem in a certain order by convention in our discipline, and that gets baked into our script. And we often have norms of inference, right? We tend to have the same idea as each other as what counts as a good explanation. What would make something the best explanation? So we're going to be quite used to the same range of ideas there, and this all gets reflected in our script. And this is useful, right? It's efficient. If you don't need to form a new relationship with a person every time you buy a coffee, that could eventually become quite wearing. It's efficient that we have these social scripts, but it can also be alienating and it can also be stifling in different contexts, right? So there's a balance here. This is a tool that is useful. We don't want to over-rely on it. The problem is if we're in formalized knowledge contexts and we're using our procedures start getting into the social script we use to interact with each other, we risk running into a kind of calcification, right? We risk our knowledge creation winding up looking quite similar over and over again because we have the same range of concepts. We feel like they are an adequate range of concepts and we don't need to introduce anything else. And we can create quite small circles around them in our discussions without feeling like we're repeating ourselves, right? And it might just be the case that we have a simply inadequate range of concepts. Or we have one concept that just seems too attractive to us. With all our training, I can see how this concept breaks everything apart. and renders everything in the world in its terms, right? Some people think like utilitarianism is very prone to this because utility just soaks up everything you're interested in moral life. But lots of people don't think utility is adequate. But I want more than one word to talk about what's morally worthwhile. So we're really prone to sort of these sort of problems in different disciplines when we have quite a limited conceptual vocabulary, or we think we have quite a powerful conceptual vocabulary, and we get a little bit too accustomed to wandering around our bit of the woods over and over again. It feels productive, maybe it often is productive, but we could bear to be more adventurous. This is kind of calcification. So what I think, what Nick Riggle's theory, or the story he tells sort of offers, is I think something really quite interesting. He thinks it almost sounds painfully 2010. It's a fantastic book, but you're trying to give an analysis of the word awesome as it appears in the phrase awesome sauce. Most people in the room, I think, are too old to remember, and I think some of the other people are too young to remember, the period from like 2008 to 2015, when a person might unironically exclaim awesome sauce in response to some prompt, right? That was when I was in late high school in my undergrad. It was a charming and optimistic moment when we all thought the internet was going to give us a sense of community with each other, and the neo-Nazis would keep to their little bit of the internet over there and not bothering. There was a vocabulary with it. The term awesome was used in very wide parlance, possibly overused, but Nick Riggle has a particular analysis of what we're meaning with that term. And he thinks basically awesomeness was a virtue particular to this social moment in which you are likely to create or foster or take up social openings. And a social opening is when we break from a script and have an opportunity to see each other straight, right? I'm in the coffee shop, I'm buying my coffee, we can rehearse our lines, but I could throw in a quip or a joke or some kind of moment that allows me and my barista to have a kind of human connection rather than my connection as customer to service provider, where we're just mediated by money, right? Like that's an alienating way to interact with each other. Social openings are the chance to have a different kind of connection to each other, to break script and have a different kind of knowledge of each other, to perform our identities as persons, individual persons, more fully, to become, he uses the line from Iris Murdoch, to become the individual in pursuit of the individual, not just the role interacting with another role. And he thinks this is a valuable and desirable thing, right? These social openings are good for us because they let us interact and achieve something resembling communion with each other. And it just seems we have this natural impulse to communion, right? So you're awesome to the extent that you foster, create, and take up social openings, and you suck to the extent that you do the opposite, right? That is kind of the analysis of this terminally online vocabulary. And I think it's quite a useful analysis. I find it quite attractive as a remembering what 2009 was like. I think he captures something quite accurate there. But I think underlying that, there's something quite telling, which is that once your social scripts are doing more than just mediating buying coffees, when they are mediating knowledge creation practices for a community of specialists, particularly people who are trained into a particular kind of knowledge creation, it becomes a vehicle of reinforcing this method. So suddenly, social openings breaking from this script become epistemic openings as well, because they're not just mechanisms for us to reinforce the same set of concepts, remind each other that this set of concepts is important, or that this concept is so powerful as to explain everything we're interested in. The advantage of a social opening here is that we get a kind of epistemic opening that comes from it. And this, I think, is what co-creation actually promises, right? We could have, our knowledge creation running on the familiar script that academics are trained into. But we get a couple of things out of that. We can either have just academics talking to each other, or we have to find a way of bringing other people in. And usually the academic script, the professional script that we all get trained in, can only bring other people in as subordinates, right? I can bring in students, but there's a subordinate identity, right? I break from my usual script in a way that's bringing someone into my script, but we're not peers in this context. Or I could do kind of public philosophy, right? I could give a talk to an assembled group of interested members of the public, but again, they've come to hear me speak because I'm the specialist. And again, there's a non-peerhood relation there in a way that doesn't seem to be attractive for co-creation. So what co-creation seems to be doing is saying, I'm bringing in a group of people who are not people with the same script as me, with the same technical training, but I'm bringing them in under description as peers. Or more importantly, I'm joining them and being accepted by peers. So we both have to depart from the script we're most used to. That forces this kind of social opening. We're breaking from the script by necessity because ideally, we are refusing to have a non-peerhood relation between the knower and the person who's receiving knowledge. there's one way this can go wrong. And when Suresh has talked about it and Raj has talked about it, a few other people have talked about it, it can become extractive. Epistemology can just become, as Lumir was saying, an exercise in like mining a group of people for the things they know or the things that they are evidence of rather than offering evidence of. And that's what happens when we have the familiar script of me, the trained person as the knower, interacting with someone else, not as a peer, but not as any other kind of subordinate. This is possibly even worse. This is not that you're my student here to learn from me. This is the person as a research participant or subject, as the one to be interpreted, not as a fellow interpreter of the world. So what co-creation seems to do, I think, is rely on a set of social conventions we have, this impulse to have communion with each other, on a really fundamental level, just the desire to be polite to each other, to offer recognition to each other, and it forces us off the scripts that we're really, really familiar with when we are trained into certain kinds of knowledge creation. And once we're forced off of these scripts, we have an opening that's not just social, it doesn't just let us achieve communion in different ways. What it also does is let us get access to perspectives that are epistemically explosive, that open up new worlds, ranges of concepts for us, new norms of inference, new ideas as to what counts as a good explanation, as the thing worth explaining, right? So the things the advantage of co-creation. It's taking advantage of habits we already have, deep-seated social conventions that we use to scaffold, to make stable and reliable all our knowledge creation. But it's taking out the thing we rely on most often that winds up calcifying all our knowledge creation efforts, that keep us going in circles, that keep us tracing quite limited circles around the same territory. Taking it away can be scary, it takes away familiarity, it suddenly requires a lot more work. This was a useful technology. These scripts, they make things easy, but they're stifling and they're limiting in lots of contexts. And we like it in our social interactions when we can break from them. We need to be more confident breaking from them in our epistemic interactions. And I think that's at the heart of it, maybe what co-creation has to offer. So I leave you hopefully with that one.